Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. Today, I want to tell you about a brain worm that has been eating away at the gray matter in my brain for the last year or so. And I want to tell you about the application to my life. I'm doing this really as a form of personal catharsis to try to express some things that I have been thinking about, and also as something of a mea culpa for the paucity of podcasts recently. We begin with a tweet, or a zeet, whatever you want to call it. And this starts from an X thread where we're talking about the different amount of wealth in the United States and in Europe and a number of different places. And so the original map is a map showing how large houses are in the United States as compared to Europe. And the original map is color-coded. Details aren't important. But that's what started the conversation, is basically showing the actual difference in size of the average house in the United States as from the average house in Europe. For example, in my home state, the average size house in Florida is 1,960 square feet. And the biggest average house size in Europe is in France, which is 1,206 square feet. If you went to one of the larger states in the United States, a state like, that's Utah, 2,800 square feet is the average size house in Utah, 2,800 square feet. Compare that with some well-known countries in Europe, where you have Spain, 1,044, Portugal, 902. The United Kingdom has an average house size of 818 square feet. So basically a third, actually less than a third, of many of the United States houses, and half of even the smallest of the United States. So houses are twice as big in the United States. And so it's interesting to reflect on the median size of houses. And so Flo drops in, and then, of course, is a year ago. Americans severely underestimate how dirt poor most Europeans are. They go spend their American wages there and are amazed at the quality of life, not realizing that they're taking the equivalent of a trip to Disneyland, and everyone around them is the staff. And, of course, that dissolves into an argument, as everything on X does. Marco chimes in with this comment, and this is one I want to talk about today. He says, Europeans aren't poor. They are illiquid. Much of Europe's wealth is stored in safe streets, nice parks, public transit, free healthcare, etc., which it turns out are too socially expensive for Americans to maintain. Americans take the money instead. The rest is only natural. And Empty America, VB Knives, joins in, which is where I saw it. He says, the TLDR is that Europe holds its wealth socially, not as liquid money available to individual consumers. You don't get a king ranch pooling an RV, but there are a lot of expensively maintained stone buildings, public spaces, etc. Let me reread those to you, because though I read them slowly, I think that this little brainworm will be something that you yourself will want to have and ponder in the days to come. Europeans aren't poor. They are illiquid. Much of Europe's wealth is stored in safe streets, nice parks, public transit, free healthcare, etc., which it turns out are too socially expensive for Americans to maintain. Americans take the money instead. The rest is only natural. And then VB Knives, the TLDR is that Europe holds its wealth socially, not as liquid money available to individual consumers. You don't get a king ranch pooling an RV, but there are a lot of expensively maintained stone buildings, public spaces, etc. I've been pondering that now for more than a year, coming back again and again to this idea in my own mind. And today, I would like to offer a little bit of an extension of this way of thinking. Now, for years here at Radical Personal Finance, I've made this comment that money is easy to measure, but just because it's easy to measure doesn't mean that it's the primary thing that should be managed. We, of course, know Peter Drucker gave this beautiful idea that what gets measured gets managed, and money is easy to measure. And I have spent my life being a natural-born American, an American through and through. I have spent my life thinking about and working with and talking about money. And money does have this wonderful numerical quality to it. We can put down the numbers. We can fill out a balance sheet. We can know exactly who has the highest net worth. And that is valuable. It genuinely is. It's good to know. And money is a pretty good proxy, a pretty good indication of how well you're doing in many areas of your life. But it's not a complete indication. Now, I love this comparison between the American culture and the European culture because I think there is something genuinely true about it. At times, I've kind of sketched out some notes for doing a show on basically how big the difference is in income between the United States and many other places in the world. And while there are places in Europe that make me feel dirt poor, looking at you, Switzerland, and there are places around the world, and Luxembourg and other places, there are places that make just me feel completely broke, and I think, how on earth do those people live? Maybe someday I'll be rich enough to live in Switzerland. But in reality, if you look at it across the society, what is astonishing is simply how wealthy Americans are. Their incomes are just so much higher, and their net worth and their wealth is so much higher. And yet, why doesn't it feel that way? And I think that this concept of how we hold our wealth is something that is worthy of exploration. The things that are basically, if you've never driven across the United States, right, the RV thing, I think, is important to know. You can basically pick any state in the United States. You can pick any rural back road to drive across. And what you will see is very, very frequently a giant RV sitting out on the property, a big, huge trailer, a big, giant truck sitting out on the property, sitting there somewhere. And those things, if you leave them outside like that, they last 10 to 20 years. Then they're just absolute junk. And so here are things that cost six figures, multiple six figures to purchase, and they just sit out there and rot away over the course of 10 to 20 years. So the amount of, or we could do this with boats, right? You can go across any poor region of the United States, and you will see that in every third driveway, there's a nice bass boat. There's a nice boat of some kind sitting there. These expressions of wealth are everywhere in terms of high consumption wealth. I'm blown away every time I see it. I'm blown away with all the new cars, all the big fancy cars, all the stuff that's just everywhere you go. It's everywhere. And it's really astonishing when you start looking at it. And yet, that's just what Americans think is normal. If you look at the international travel and all these things, it's just Americans have no concept of how rich they are compared to many other places. And this is just really only getting worse, meaning getting more pronounced. Worse and better is just more pronounced, more and more true in many ways. And yet, there's that flip side, is that doesn't mean that this is the wealthiest country. It also annoys me to drive across the United States of America and see giant new housing communities going in and people still building houses with 2x4s and particle board in the year 2025. It's scandalous as far as I'm concerned. And yet, if an American sat down and said, you know what, I want to build a house that my great-grandchildren may live in someday, and starts picking up bricks and putting them together, or picking up stones and piling them on top of one another, that American can never even dream of affording that house. And so you have this constant quality of everyone's living in fancy new drywall 2x4 particle board houses that are going to last about 50 to 120 years, and then they'll be torn down and replaced with something else. But it's basically not possible for anybody to build an actual dwelling that will endure. There's not even any masons who can do the work. And yet you go to Prague and downtown Prague and you walk around, and nobody in downtown Prague can afford an RV. Nobody can afford a bass boat. Nobody can afford those toys and baubles and things like that. But you're living in the middle of incredible wealth. You're living in the middle of this heritage of buildings and bridges and public spaces, this society, these nice parks, these streets, these things that Americans will go and pay lots of money to go and tour. And I'm not here today to give you a screed about which way is better. I'm here today to simply observe that they are different. I'm here today to say that the wealth that can be measured on a balance sheet, a personal balance sheet, in terms of dollars, is not the same as the wealth that can be measured in a full, broad-based understanding of somebody's life. That's important. As I've thought about this over the last year, I've basically adjusted a little bit, and I've simply said, Americans hold their wealth in paper assets. And that paper, if we wanted to be critical, we would say, well, it's the paper-thin walls of an RV that's going to rot to nothing in 15 years. If we wanted to be less critical, we would say, well, it's paper in the form of stocks and ownership of paper assets and investment assets. And I think both are probably true. And then I've thought, Europeans hold their wealth in stone. And of course, there's paper assets there, but in terms of money and investments and companies and things like that. But really, there's a big heritage to the stone, quite literally the physical stone, and what the stone entails. I'm not sure what the other versions would be. I'm not well enough traveled to know how that metaphor would be applied to every other corner of the world, but there's a truth there to it. I hope you'll think about that. Because now I want to turn my question to you. In what form do you hold your wealth? What I do know is that if we take this idea, this metaphor, this truth of wealth, and we take it out a little bit, we could see its applications in other areas. If we looked at each country, we could see that some countries might hold their wealth in stone. Other countries might hold their wealth in people. And isn't that an interesting concept? For example, if we were talking about some countries, we could talk about natural resources. We could say, this is a country that is rich in natural resources. But in the corporate world, we talk about human resources. We could talk about a different country that is rich in human resources. A country that has a lot of people, has a lot of young people. This really counts. When I think about investing over the coming decades, I'm very interested in young countries where there's youthfulness and vigor, the vigor that gives to a country as compared to old, gray, boring, dying countries. Isn't that interesting to think about? Now, when we turn to, I guess we could think about this. We could talk about cultural wealth. Some countries have rich cultures where the people are united. They are clear on who they are, on what their identity is. Although we don't like to say it, I think it's clearly true that other countries do not have the same level of cultural wealth. Not all peoples are created equal. And while we always try to point out the nice things about one culture versus another, there's clearly superior cultures and inferior cultures. That's interesting to think about. Let's turn to the personal side, though. In what form do you hold your wealth? It's easy to measure money, but let's say that you meet a man who yesterday had $1 million, and then he spent it all. Would you consider him to be a wealthy man? He doesn't have the $1 million anymore. I think the answer to that question would depend upon what he did with the $1 million. One man who took the $1 million and spent it on vice and sin, destroyed his fellow man with it, is left on the other side with $1 million worth of poverty. I mean, the $1 million is gone, and all he's done is made the world worse. The other man who takes the $1 million and spends it on virtue, on positive things, on things that make his community better, make the people around him better, he's much richer than he was with the $1 million. So we can invest into things like relationships. If a man has $1 million yesterday, and then he spent $1 million to cure his wife's cancer, and today he has a cancer-free wife and no $1 million, is he wealthier than he was yesterday? I bet you he would say he is. Now, someone on the outside would say, well, depends on the wife. But clearly, he would say he made the better deal. And so these questions related to relationships I find really, really interesting and engaging. Can you hold your wealth in the form of things like relationships? My answer is you can. Over the years, I've thought about this. I look at my parents, for example, and my parents are fine. They don't need my money. But if they did need my money, if they needed it, they would be entitled to all of it. Why? Because they're my parents. And that's something that's very important to me in my culture. And I know there are many other cultures in the world that also very much hold this, is that the idea of my parents being in want or in lack and me being in plenty is unthinkable to me. It's probably the same for you. So the question is, are your parents wealthy? Well, if they have you, then the answer is yes, they are. Think about it. Let's assume that my parents were sued, assume that they're morally guiltless, but so they're sued and the court takes away all their money. All their money is taken away from them. My parents would never have to work a day in their life. They would never have to worry about a roof over their head. They wouldn't have to worry about anything that they needed in their life because they have children who will take care of them. That is a form of wealth. In our current cultural moment, old people don't like to presume upon their children. They don't want to have their children have to pay for anything, right? That's the boomer mindset. I don't want my children to have to pay for anything. And yet, this is still there. If you have a boomer who has $1 million and then he spends all his $1 million, what is he left with? Usually he's left with whatever government benefits he has, which incidentally is another valid form of wealth. Having access to a bunch of government benefits is a form of wealth. Many people exploit that. That's an interesting road to go down. I don't enjoy going down that, but it's true and it should be acknowledged. Now, let's say that we're back into this personal analysis. Let's say that a man sells everything he's got to make a fortune. And at the end of his life, he's financially rich, but he destroyed his health. May have been something that we're very sympathetic towards, right? The coal miner laboring down in the coal mines, the soldier exposed to Agent Orange has cancer now, the guy who breathed asbestos and is now dead. It may be the kind of thing that we're less sympathetic toward, right? The guy who drank his way business meeting after business meeting to fatty liver disease, or ate his way through carbohydrate-laden late-night fancy dinners, and now he's fat and old and sick and has $1 bazillion, but now he has no health. Will that man spend all of his money, wealth, to try to get his health back? If he can, he will. And yet in many cases, it's not really possible. Now compare that to some guy you probably know. You go to the beach, Tuesday morning, some old guy kind of putt-putts up in his rundown old jalopy, little $2,000 car that's barely going, gets out. He's old. Skin's a little wrinkly. He's got a tan that's 10 layers deep. Grabs a book out of the back of his car, tosses a towel over his shoulder, goes down to the beach, starts doing his morning yoga session or his morning calisthenics session, spends the next, maybe goes for a surf, spends the next 4 or 5 hours lying on the beach reading his book, not a care in the world, goes with his buddies and has a late lunch, drink a few beers in the middle of the day, goes and plays a little volleyball, whatever. You get the point, right? He doesn't have any money, but what does he have? He's got his health. And of course, your mind is probably going to that old parable of the Mexican fisherman. It's powerful because it's true. These are the decisions that we make in life. Said at the beginning of the show, a bit of catharsis, right? What did I mean? Well, the reason is I've been, as I mentioned, right? My family and I are in Brazil. We're having a baby. This is our 6th baby. We're super excited for that baby, but I'm trying hard to do what I try to do whenever I can to help my wife to have kind of a break, right, in and around childbirth, and try to give her a break and do as much as I can. I'm also in the middle of basically disrupting and upsetting everything in my life. Every single thing is in the process. I'm changing everything. And between having 5 young children, going and doing birth tourism in Brazil, buying a business, I have a bunch of clients that are a lot of work that are, anyway, point is I'm stretched to my absolute max. I very rarely reach capacity, and I'm at capacity now. And so these weeks and this time has been enormously stressful for me. And every single day, it basically gets worse because I'm more and more aware of the things that aren't done on my never-ending to-do list, right? Those things that are not done. And I think, okay, I've got to get that done. I got to get this done. I got to behind on this. I got this responsibility. It just goes on and on and on and on. So then the question is, well, Joshua, what are you doing? And if you ask me, I know what I'm doing. I'm investing into my wealth, into the things that I care about. And I care about holding my wealth in the form of relationships. I care about having another baby. I feel like, though I don't have as many dollars in my bank account as I'd like to have, I feel much wealthier than most men because of my children. And I'm proud of them. I enjoy hanging out with them. I'm glad they're here. I want them to be here. But they ain't free. And nothing else in life is free either, right? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So I've been prioritizing my relationships, my friends, my family, doing my best to do those things, but it comes with a cost. Where is the cost? Well, right now it's coming in the cost of my health. Step count way down, exercise way down, not low quality food, eating poorly. That's a cost. That can't go on for very long, right? Probably can absorb a few weeks or months of that, but that can't go on very long, or I'll pay the price down the road. And then, of course, business is business. And so you can't do it all. You have to do one thing or do the other. So I'm not here to try to unload all that on you or to say, I mean, I'm a man, I deal with my own problems and fix my own things. Just simply saying that these are the decisions that we all face. So I want you to know I love you as my listener. I want to be on the microphone. And if I'm not on the microphone, it's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I'm just a jerk. It's because I'm trying to invest into my own wealth of relationships. And I think that's something that's under-discussed in today's world. Probably not under-discussed here at Radical Personal Finance, but it is something that's under-discussed. Something that I'm pretty clear on, had that vision for a long time. You know, if I think about myself as an old man, I'd much rather be an old man living in one of my children's spare bedrooms without a penny to my name than be an old man who's super rich and no children with bedrooms. If I had to choose, I'd rather be healthy at 100 and be able to play with my great-grandchildren on the beach than have a few extra zeros in the bank. So if I had to choose between staying in that spare bedroom and being able to play on the beach and not having anything else, then I'll choose that. Now, as I always say, hopefully we don't have to choose. Hopefully we can do it all. But doing it all, you can't do it all at the same time. And that's certainly where I'm at the moment. So forgive me for not being on the mic as much as I would like. I'll share more in the future. I'm still here. I've been doing a lot of work with private clients and things like that. So I'm still here, just sometimes doing my course, the Academy, RPF Academy, and hot and heavy all through the time. And just the podcast has not happened due to those things. But I hope you understand, and I hope that these ideas are useful to you, just ask yourself, what form am I holding my wealth in? What forms of wealth am I building? Let's seek to build all of the different types of wealth and capital that are possible. Let's not just measure everything by our financial wealth. Let's not just measure everything by size of our paycheck, the size of our 401k, the size of our investment accounts. Let's reflect on the fact that living in a beautiful neighborhood with big, heavy stone houses is valuable, and having a big, full Christmas table with lots of smiling faces is valuable, and having a neighborhood block party where lots of people come, or having lots of people show up at your birthday party, or whatever other form, and having a strong, healthy body at 100, these things are valuable. And in life, what we continually do is we go between these different forms of capital. We're born with nothing but raw human capital, the ability to break stones, big stones, into little stones, and hopefully buy a little bit of food. And so we start off with nothing but our physical energy. Then we try to convert physical energy and time, our time capital, into intellectual capital. We try to earn more money. And as we earn more money, then we can turn around and we try to invest that into our bodies, into our relationships, and all of that. So we're constantly flowing among these different forms of capital. And when you understand that, then hopefully it'll help you to feel confident in the decisions you're making and recognize that taking a couple months off to invest into your children or your wife or your husband or whatever it is, that's probably a good thing. And if you need to reset and take a year off and invest into your body or into your health, that's a good thing. And doing these things proactively is usually going to result in a better outcome than doing them late. But these are genuine, legitimate forms of wealth. And if we can recognize them and we could try to account for them and we can even try to count them in some way, then these are things that will help us so that we don't get overly focused on the financial capital. Hope that's useful to you. Ciao.